Today, we're diving into alarming developments in the UK and beyond, the criminalization of dissent, with Palestine Action now facing proscription as a terrorist organization. Free speech and the right to protest are under direct attack. As George Monbiot pointed out, we've entered a world where Yvette Cooper praises the suffragettes while backing laws that will label them as terrorists today. Today's show features four-time US presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein, who joins us to unpack this moment of extreme repression. We'll also hear her thoughts on Zohran Mamdani's recent win in New York and the urgent need for all of us to keep building new systems that challenge oligarchy and empire. So, Jill, I want to start with the crackdown on protests that we're seeing in the UK. As you know, the government has now moved to prescribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organization under the Terrorism Acts of 2000. And as we know, Palestine Action is a non-violent, symbolic, non-lethal group. So what does this move tell you about the state of the UK and other liberal democracies today?
And certainly we have the same thing going on here in the US, where people are even being, kidnapped, grabbed by masked men off the street for no reason at all. And protesters are very much under the gun. It really reflects how desperate the empire is to silence not just dissent, but all-out rebellion, an uprising that demands an end to empire and oligarchy and genocide. And the powers that be are very vulnerable on all those scores, but especially, the rebellion against genocide is huge. It's generational. It's really historic. And they are pulling out all the stops to shut it down. The fact that people whose offense who practiced civil disobedience and their offense was, essentially spray painting, sorry about that. The fact that people whose offense was essentially spray painting, are being accused of being terrorists, and those who even express support or agreement with them are at risk for up to, 12 or 14 years in jail. It's outrageous, and I think it reflects how desperate the empire is, because polls show how much the wider public is in agreement with them vehemently. And Israel's behavior is so infuriating, so absolutely disgusting, that the public is so much in agreement with them that, the empire is just desperate to try to shut it down. And there's no way that they will be able to do that.
I see. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you think this, deeper authoritarianism is as a result of our success?
Yes, very much. I mean, I think there are multiple causes here. It is the deepening, I think, control of corporations, of big money in our political system that is, the fundamental driver here is, as the early fascists, in Italy said that fascism is essentially corporatism. And it is that concentrated power in the hands of corporations and billionaires that is driving both imperial designs and, the horrific behavior of the empire to start with. The fact that we have this unsinkable battleship in Israel so that we can secure oil, that is imperial behavior. And hand in hand with empire abroad comes imperial behavior at home, which is the crushing of civil liberties. And so it's multiple things. It's that we are being successful, which is driving the empire crazy. And then it's imperial behavior in and of itself. As Martin Luther King said, militarism, racism, and extreme materialism aka capitalism, they go hand in hand. And when you see one, you generally get the other, which is why, you know, we need to fight this on the concrete issues. We need to fight funding, for Israel. We need to fight the control of AIPAC over our political systems. But we also have to fight to change our political systems. And we have to fight basically to get the people back into politics and get money and corporations out.
Mm-hmm. Jill, you touched on the climate in the US right now. Can you paint a more detailed picture of what that looks like with ICE, arresting migrants and so on? And also, where do you see this going?
I think we have two very powerful trends right now. One is this rising fascism, whether you call it fascism or near fascism, I don't think it really matters. But clearly, we are heading into extremes of both militarism, the suppression of our civil liberties, the assault on human rights. We're seeing that in a very big way. At the same time that we are seeing this growing uprising against empire, against oligarchy, against genocide. We see this especially in the reversal of polls, and I don't know what the status of those polls is in the UK, but certainly here in the US, we have seen this surge of opposition now where a majority of the public has a very unfavorable opinion of Israel. Over 60% want a shutdown of military support for Israel immediately, and a huge majority, I think it's more than a supermajority, wants an end to the genocide. So we are seeing this pervasive shutdown of human rights and civil rights in this country. The attack on free speech, so many journalists who have lost their jobs, who are having, police raids of their homes, like the Uhuru African Socialist People's Party, and Omali Yashatila, who was recently facing 15 years in jail, essentially for his lifelong agenda of liberty and justice and racial justice in particular, being accused of being a Russian agent, a Russian spy. We are seeing, this clampdown on free expression, especially on campuses and for migrants. Hundreds of people, sent off to the Gulag in El Salvador and beyond now for basically simply for looking like a migrant, without any due process. We have an assault on due process. We have an assault on the separation of powers. It's an extremely dangerous time here. At the same time that the political parties who've instigated this, and yes, it's more extreme right now under Republicans, but historically we have two parties that change places. So it's still the Democrats that are leading on the score of deportations, which now, the Trump administration is striving for 3,000 deportations a day. It's absolutely staggering what's going on. People are living in fear. Excuse me. So you have these two polarities right now where the empire is really doubling down. People are really rising up in resistance. And, to look at like Los Angeles, where ICE and the National Guard are basically an occupying military force. People are not backing down. They are still out, and there are community efforts to watchdog, to sound the alarm when ICE is in the neighborhood. You had Congress just pass this horrific bill, which is tripling the funding right now for Homeland Security and for ICE. It's absolutely staggering. At the same time that basic health and human services and food stamps are being absolutely slashed. and money is pouring in to the hands of the super wealthy in this tax cut right now. I saw a wonderful analysis from Stephen Semler, who's a noted political analyst and economist, showing that if you are in the top 20%, basically you've been delivered a $50,000. Now that's average. So that, it's much higher if you're in the top 2 and 1%. But on average for the top 20%, they've just been delivered a $50,000 gift, essentially, if you were to quantitate the average benefit to the wealthy. If you're in the poor 20%, those who are in most desperate need, who are in poverty, they've been, let's see, I misspoke. It's actually $50,000 delivered to the top, $25,000 taken away from those at the bottom. So this really is, it's emblematic, I think, of the extremes to which our society has now gone. And, I think what's happening in America is happening all over the world, in part because of America's influence. And the neoliberal agenda has been an absolute disaster. And there are studies now, again, showing that the reason the Republicans won in this country and the reason Trump won is not because people like Trump or even knew about him, but because they abhor what the Democrats have come to represent, most notably NAFTA, the offshoring of our jobs, the Wall Street bailouts, the millions of homeowners who were thrown out for foreclosures in this country at the same time that all sorts of gifts are being bestowed upon the top 1%. This is an extremely unstable system, and it can only endure because democracy is being shut down to keep it in place. And this is happening both on the part of Republicans, but Democrats have absolutely laid the groundwork here as well. And as horrible as the current bill is, say, for people on Medicaid, under Joe Biden, when he basically canceled the expansion of Medicaid under the COVID provisions, even more people, it was like 20 million, something like that, 24 million were thrown off of Medicaid. People are screaming right now because it may be 16 million who are being thrown off, but you hardly heard a peep about it when the Democrats were in control. So, this is to say we have a deep bipartisan political problem in this country, but Americans are running with their hair on fire away from this political system, which is, of course, why the oligarchs work so hard, and the Democratic National Committee in particular, not only to suppress progressive candidates and viewpoints within their own party, but they work even harder to suppress you if you are a challenge from outside. Excuse me. They work even harder to challenge you they work even harder to suppress you if you are challenging from outside of the party.
Well, that's a perfect segue to talk about Zohran Mamdani's win. And from what I saw, he was also smeared by his own party's establishment, yet he still won, running unapologetically on a pro-Palestine, grassroots-funded campaign. So what does that mean? What does his win mean to you within this context of a complete political shutdown?
Well, what it means above all is that he was the beneficiary of having a leading opponent who is, one of the most despised politicians in the country. He very much benefited from that. He also benefited from ranked choice voting, which is a reform that we have been pushing for decades, actually. It speaks volumes that the so-called progressive Democratic City Council in New York City adopted ranked choice voting, which allows progressives to collaborate across party lines. It allows us to overcome the divide and conquer system. It also allows us to overcome the fear of the, spoiler in elections. That reform was adopted, but only for Democrats, and they prohibited it being used in the general, which is really unfortunate, because if it was operating in the general, it would certainly help advantage Zohran's campaign in the general election. There are a lot of unhappy campers out there, and it's wonderful that he was able to overcome that. But, this has happened before. For example, in Buffalo, New York, where, what's her name? I'm forgetting her name at the moment, but there was a very progressive Democratic Socialist candidate, India Walton. This was maybe 6 or 8 years ago, who won the Democratic mayoral primary for Buffalo, New York, ran a great campaign. And after she won, the incumbent, who had been in office for decades, simply pulled out and ran as an independent. He didn't even get on the ballot. He ran a write-in campaign. And because so much money poured in to support him, she was defeated. So this is, a great fear that Mamdani is going to be India Waltoned, as we say. And we know that Cuomo is going to run independent. You've also got Eric Adams, that many of the Zionist forces are congregating behind right now. So there will be a huge amount of money pouring into that. The Democratic Party, in fact, the leadership was so busy smearing Zohran, they didn't bother to get the word out about the actual content of this One Big Beautiful Bill, which then passed. It passed without the public really having any idea what was in that bill and being able to really weigh in to their elected representatives to stop it. It could have been stopped. It should have been stopped. But the Democrats were AWOL because they were too busy educating people, so-called, about what they thought their made up, their disinformation campaign actually about Zohran.
Mm.
It's a wonderful thing that he has prevailed, but it's really important for us to keep up the fight and not lay down arms now. This is another fear, that this will be used to try to disarm political opposition outside of the party, as we call sheepdogs have done before. That's not to say Zohran is a sheepdog, but the Democratic National Committee and others will certainly be using him to try to sheepdog people back into the party. One thing Zohran, does wonderfully, his views on Israel and Zionism and Gaza, and his focus on the really outrageous issues of inaffordability and how those can be fixed, especially in housing and transportation and food. So he's got really wonderful proposals, but he is not in this race for all sorts of reasons, including some good strategic ones. He's not actually talking about changing the system. But if we want to actually get those things, we're going to need system change here. Some of us are actually really hopeful that we could encourage Zohran to support, even if it's just ranked choice voting, and also expanding access to the ballot in New York State. Greens and other grassroots political parties have basically been wiped off the political map in New York because Governor Cuomo put a Trojan horse provision into the budget some years ago that made it virtually impossible for grassroots campaigns to get on the ballot. You have to collect so many signatures. It's really impossible. So we're hoping that Zohran would at least introduce these essential democracy provisions like ranked choice voting and ballot access, and then maybe more public funding as an alternative to corporate funding in elections. That's essentially, the democracy agenda that we have been promoting for a long time. Without that, it's hard to see how we are ever going to get, the critical mass to really confront the political system, because it is more under lock and key than ever, more influenced by big money lobbyists, AIPAC, the war profiteers, and so on. We really need a way to unify across political agendas without surrendering the system fight.
Right. I mean, I think you have always been consistent, as Dr. Butch Ware has been, on the fact that the system needs a complete overhaul because it's has so many entrenched interests in it already. So that leads me to ask you about Dr. Butch's running for the governorship of California. And you've talked about Medicaid, and I know that's one of his priorities. Can you take us through what that would mean for California?
Oh, it would be incredible. And let me say that California is a special case in the same way that New York City is a special case because it has public transportation, because the costs of living are so off the charts. They also are in California. And in California, and because they had Cuomo running in that election, it's highly likely that the Democratic counterpart of Andrew Cuomo will be the Democratic candidate, that is Kamala Harris, is highly likely because the current governor, Newsom, he's termed out and he wants to run for president. So the Democratic nomination, and it's a different system. It's what we call top two. So you have a primary, but it's an open primary, and everybody competes in that primary. So it's entirely possible. Well, put it this way, there are many scenarios by which Butch Ware could win the second slot in the primary. And that second slot, the last time it was competed for, it was won, in other words, the last time they had a primary, it was won with 17% of the vote. 17% of that primary vote got the second place after Newsom, who got like 60%, somewhere around there, maybe 64%. He got a lot. And the next number two slot was way down below, but that's the way California works. The top two then become the nominees who compete in the general. So even though they are going to pull out all the stops to silence such a powerful and eloquent, inspirational person that Butch Ware is, the media, will be doing its best to cancel him. But if he can get into that second slot, which is entirely possible, because there may be many Democrats that are competing for it, and there are typically many Republicans that are competing for it. So if Butch can manage to rise above that 17%, well, it's not a 17% threshold. Let me just say, if he can rise into that second slot, he could very well be in the general. And at that point, they cannot shut him out, no matter what they do. And his personal power, his overwhelming sense of justice, he is very in touch with the migrant community, very in touch with the anti-genocide community, the African-American community, the Muslim community. Part of his family is Mexican immigrant as well. He has a really organic and wonderful feel for many of the major communities in struggle, especially in California. So I encourage everyone to check him out and to show him some love, because we need to expand what Zohran Mamdani was able to do. We need to bring that to a state like California, and we need to bring it outside of the Democratic Party, where it will be crushed in one way or another. And let's, fingers crossed for Zohran, but also we need that type of victory in California. It will benefit all of us so much. So I really encourage people to go check out Butch Ware for governor. be inspired. I'm so grateful to Butch for stepping up in the absolutely inspirational way that he has.
Mm. Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, we are with you all the way. And we were so grateful to Dr. Butch for helping us nominate Gary Lineker for the Nobel Peace Prize. As you know, Gary Lineker has, remained consistent to his values in standing up for Palestine and, faced repercussions. In contrast, of course, we saw in the news that Netanyahu is nominating Trump for the Peace Prize. So I guess the question is, what does this say about people who get rewarded for peace today?
Yeah, and how many heroes out there do we see memorialized in statues,
Sure.
for their contributions to peace? We have a very war-dominated culture, a war-dominated economy, like the UN rapporteur, just put out an amazing report about the economy of genocide and the economy of ethnic cleansing and the incredible corporate forces that profit from this. And in fact, that is the very definition of fascism, which is the merger of corporate and state power. And fighting the peace community is part of that. And it's important to remember this doesn't represent the public. This is not the agenda of the public. This is the agenda of oligarchy and empire, which the American people reject, lock, stock, and barrel. That agenda is taking us to the brink of nuclear war, both with this outrageous attack against Iran. Supposedly there is a ceasefire, but I wouldn't hold my breath because the drivers for that conflict are still very much in effect. You have Russia, solidifying its support with Iran, the potential for China to do the same. And you've got Netanyahu in his desperation with his nuclear weapons, which are, of course, illegal, and the potential that he could be using them. I just want to make the point here that empire is a threat, not just to its victims around the world, which are legion, but also to us here at home, and that there is no such thing as a local nuclear war, that the use of nuclear weapons has repercussions all over the world, has consequences, including that it is that militarism itself is a major driver of climate change, and we are teetering at the brink of extremely serious climate change. Not only what happened here in Texas with this really tragic flash flood that's killed somewhere around 100 people, many of them children camping at an overnight camp. They didn't get the warnings. This is inseparable from the cuts that have been made by the Trump administration and the upcoming cuts, which will be much worse, which are undercutting the ability of science to predict the weather and is, slashing the staffing at the National Weather Service. And that includes people who coordinate the response, who prepare in advance, all that. They were really caught unprepared due to the devastating harm being done by this mindset of taking a hatchet to our public services. So we all pay a price for empire and oligarchy and the incredibly destructive way that it approaches both our foreign policy and our domestic policy. So it's not like out of some do-good responsibility. It's even in your own self-interest that we have to really up the ante. We have to unify. We have the numbers. We have the solutions. We know how to shut down this genocide. We fund it and we arm it. We, the United States. I don't mean we, us. I mean our misrepresentatives who are abusing our tax dollars and abusing justice here at home in order to abuse justice and to put life itself at risk. all across the planet. There's a lot of momentum right now to do the right thing. So I just want to thank everybody, who's out there, including Gary Lineker, to thank them for their leadership, which is so critical at any time, but especially right now. So thank you so very much. Keep up your good work.
No, thank you. I think, Jill, a lot of thanks needs to go out to also artists these days. We're seeing, Roger Waters, of course, for decades, but more recently, Bob Vylan, Massive Attack, and so on. But I actually want to come back to this point about the fact that we should all be on high alert because we're all linked and those linkages. So obviously you talked about climate change and the nuclear issue. I wonder if I could invite you to speak a little bit about AI surveillance. So we've seen in this genocide, shockingly, how AI has been deployed to be part of the military machine. And of course, we're seeing AI play into how people are policed also in liberal democracies. And that, of course, is going to get worse. So I just wonder if you could speak about that, because I think that affects us all as well.
Yes, I mean, amen to that. The way that AI is being used for targeting in Gaza is horrific. The way that AI is being used to track Palestinians, to know where people are, so that just a couple days ago, you had an assault on the director of the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. He and his family, a beloved cardiologist, and his family were targeted. The IOF, the Israeli Occupation Forces, they know where you are. When Bob Vylan chanted his chant, you know, uh, an awful lot of people are in agreement with him because the Israeli occupation forces, they are really the personification of the horrific practices of the state of Israel. And AI is at the heart of that. AI does so much of makes their strategic decisions and targets people. AI is also used, in the research establishment, and Elbit Systems, for example, I think is part of that. But I know here at MIT, I live in the Boston area, and the MIT students have been absolutely heroic, not only in protesting the genocide in Gaza, but also watchdogging their own school and its cooperation with weapons manufacturers. And they exposed the fact that the AI department in MIT had a grant from the Knesset, from the Israeli Knesset, was funding some of the weapons and the AI research at MIT. And that research includes, for example, groundbreaking AI teaching robots how to swarm and enabling drones to swarm. So can you imagine, instead of just a single drone that's coming to track you, you've got a whole army of drones, which is flying in tight formation. So AI is, sort of exemplifies the harm, the viciousness, the evil of corporate capitalism, absolutely run amok in the military universe. And it's got to be brought to an end. That doesn't mean ending AI, but we need to put an end to AI that can be used in any way. And in fact, this bill, this one big beautiful bill, included a provision that prohibited regulation of AI by any state for 10 years. Now, there was a rumor that that was being eliminated from the bill. And at the end of the day, the dust hasn't settled enough yet. I haven't double checked that one to find out whether that survived, but certainly that is the impulse of the industry and the billionaires behind it, is to prevent any regulation, and they have succeeded in doing that so far. This is not just homicide. This is not just war crimes. This is also suicide. We are not going to survive in a world of that nature. So I want to agree with you, Mary, that what happens to AI is so critically important. And you know, there are so many things. Let me put it this way. There are so many things. There are so many threats to our survival now, whatever dimension you look. This, to me, is why we need a political force, because a political force that's powered by people and not powered by corporations. This is why we need antidotes to the Democratic and Republican parties in our country and to other parties, in the UK and beyond. We need people-powered politics that are powered by working people, that serve working people, and not just the agenda of the war monsters who are running the show right now to our detriment. We need to build coalitions, and we need to act together, because they're relying on the game of divide and conquer. They know we have more numbers. They know that we are winning in the polls. We represent public values, both on behalf of the economic needs of working people, as well as the foreign policy needs of working people. We are winning the day, but they have their hand right now on the big media, on the propaganda powers, and so on. So it's really important that we overcome that with people power, and we can only do that together.
No, thank you for that. I just want to gauge your opinion on where we are. What is the status of the we? Okay, so we've spoken to Vijay Prashad about the state of the left, and he's expressed his concerns. We've discussed what cross-border platforms there are, between like-minded people. We have Jeremy Corbyn, a friend of the show, looking to form a new party, and Zara Sultana resigning from Labour. So we see hints of us being able to mobilize, but really, what is the state of us today?
So there's no doubt that we are in rebellion. And you see that in every poll that I have seen. I know the polls best here in the US, but from what I've seen in Europe as well, people are in rebellion. The right, the far right, appears to be the up and coming force only because it's the left which gets really suppressed, and which people have trouble finding, because because the oligarchs would be much happier with a Donald Trump than they would with a Butch Ware or a Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, we saw how the system rose up to smear Corbyn based on this false representation of anti-Semitism, which was like a harbinger of what was to come for everybody. Everybody's an anti-Semite now, to hear it their way. But to look at any of the indicators, the rebellion is in full swing. And if I can quote Alice Walker, the poet and novelist, who said, "The biggest way people give up power is by not recognizing that we have it to start with." We have a huge amount of power. As Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. So we are suppressed in the public view. And then we are not only, denied funding and outfunded with oligarch money. We wouldn't want their money to start with, but, we don't have a public platform. Let me contrast this with Mexico and the Morena Party there. It's not a perfect party, and they haven't solved all of Mexico's problems, but they have definitely improved the status of working people. And, poverty levels have gone down, wages have gone way up. Morena came together as a series of small parties and social movements and essentially overthrew the ruling old guard that had been in power for almost 100 years. And they did that right after they were able to put limits on money in politics. We don't have any limits in this country whatsoever, where you had Elon Musk, spending $250 million to get Donald Trump elected. And we saw how well that went. Ha ha ha. And Mexico not only put some limits on funding they still have corruption to deal with, but they're not going to fix it all, in a decade. And they've been in power for about a decade. Total transformation. They got lots of peasants and the poor to engage the political system for the first time. They helped get money out of politics, or at least put limits on it, and they created a more or less level playing field on media. You cannot buy media the way you can buy media here in this country. And, Mexico is one of the few countries that actually, has come out in opposition to the genocide in Gaza. And, it's a model of how the small people-powered political movements can get together and actually prevail, much like they did in Mamdani's campaign as well. And it's been done before in this country, but the Democratic Party keeps smashing it when it breaks through. But it's not, it's not a static situation. It's very much a moving target right now. And the misery that drives change, that drives real hunger, that drives an uprising, literal hunger, in fact, that's only getting worse all the time. So the drivers for political change are deeper all the time. The internet at one point was a tool that gave much hope for people power. And then we saw oligarchs come in and basically control the internet, not entirely, but they can make it very difficult to use the internet for public purpose right now because they control the megaphones all over the internet, and on social media and so forth. So it's a very fluid situation, but along with that, the impulse and the momentum for change keeps building all the time. And what's new and unprecedented in my political lifetime is seeing support collapse for the status quo, for the parties of oligarchy. The Democrats are at the lowest approval ever in history. It's like 27% favorability right now among the public. And, we're looking at Donald Trump, who really won on a fluke, not because people supported him, but because people reviled Democrats and knew about the betrayals of Democrats against working people. So many low-income and working people voted for Trump. But that support has essentially disappeared. And Trump is now deeply underwater. At 100 days, he was the most unpopular president ever in recorded U.S. history. So, his base is basically gone. He's hanging in by a thread. And it's really important for us to overcome this game of divide and conquer. We've got the numbers. As Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. And we need to be working together and having incredibly inspirational powerhouse candidates like Butch Ware out there in a way that, along with Zohran Mamdani, galvanizing people. And my hope is that the Democratic Party forbids their candidates from showing any support to outside parties, but simply to open the doors to democracy, to a multi-partisan democracy through ranked choice voting, through proportional representation, through public funding, getting big money out of politics and putting the people back in, opening up ballot access. Things like that advance the cause of democracy and enable us to collaborate across party lines. So while things are scarier than they have ever been in my lifetime, I think they're also more hopeful. If you know how to dig deeper below the headlines and actually read what's going on, there's enormous potential for real change right now. And there's no way that it can be stopped.
That's a perfect way to end the show. So unless you have anything else to add, that I had other questions, but I knew you were just going to end it perfectly right there. So unless you have anything else to add, I got more than what I wanted. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, great. And I
Thank you.
apologize for the late start, but I think
No,
we
it's such an
made good
honor
use
to
of
have
our
you with
time.
us. Anytime. We will stay here for you, always. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing. And
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I should just add the shout out for independent media like Raw
Yes.
Politics.
Thanks.
That is, you know, you're our lifeline. You are our lifeline. I encourage people to support Raw Politic and independent media in general, because this is how we overcome that, you know, that political strategy that would divide us. This is how we get together and actually understand what it is that raw power is doing. We've got to overcome that with people power, thanks to your help. So thank you so much, Mary, and thanks to everybody over there at Raw Politic.